You climb the barren hill at dawn, wind slicing through your robe, the scent of dust and salt sharp in your lungs. The structure ahead looks like a fortress, round, silent, defiant against time, but there are no gates, no guards, no torches. Only a ring of stone and the circling shadow of wings. You take one step closer, and the truth arrives like a whisper carried by the wind. This is not a fortress. It's a graveyard that never sleeps. Before we journey deeper into the secrets of ancient Persia, take a moment to pause. Where in the world are you watching from? It still amazes us that from every corner of the earth, from Karachi to Copenhagen, from deserts to mountain towns, we gather here to unearth the lost worlds of history together. So, if you're captivated by forgotten rituals and haunting civilizations, like this video, subscribe, and let's keep exploring the echoes of the past, one story at a time. In ancient Persia, death was not a curtain falling. It was a breach in the cosmic order, a wound that had to be cleansed before it infected the living world. To the Zoroastrians, the followers of the prophet Zarathustra, the body of the dead was not sacred but tainted. It was nasu, corruption incarnate, a vessel through which the demon of decay spread his influence into everything pure. Earth, fire, water, and air, the four sacred elements, could not be defiled by a corpse. Burying the dead poisoned the soil, burning them offended fire, letting them sink into rivers desecrated the divine waters. So the Persians built their towers of silence, the dakmas, to surrender the dead to the sky. These towers stood apart from cities, often on rocky hills where the wind never ceased. Their stone walls rose without ornamentation, yet the geometry was sacred, perfect circles symbolizing eternity. Within, no sound was heard except the low, patient hiss of the wind and the distant cry of vultures. When someone died, priests known as nasu salars arrived in silence, faces veiled to shield them from impurity. They did not touch the corpse directly but used iron tongs, metal being incorruptible, to lift it onto a stone bier. Then, in solemn procession, the body was carried to the tower's crown. There, under the burning Persian sun, it was laid out naked on smooth stone, men on one side, women on another, children in their own small circle. No prayers were whispered. No tears were allowed to touch the ground. The ceremony was not of mourning, but of release. Soon the vultures descended, a flurry of black wings and beating air. The priests watched from a distance, chanting lines from the Vendidad. Let the flesh return to the flesh of the earth. Let corruption consume corruption, that Asha may be restored. Within hours, the body was gone. Only bones remained, pale and dry, glinting in the sun like ivory. When the flesh was devoured, the priests swept the remains into a central pit known as the Ostudan, where they would slowly crumble, washed clean by rain and time. To the Persians, this was not horror. It was harmony. The vultures were divine instruments, carriers of purification who bore the corruption away on their wings. Yet, even after death, danger lingered. The nasu was said to cling to everything the dead had touched, their clothing, their walls, even the air of their room. The home of the deceased became untouchable for days. Those who entered risked contamination. Cleansing was no symbolic act. It was chemical, physical, and precise. The priests used a liquid called gomez, the urine of consecrated bulls raised within temple walls. To modern ears, it sounds grotesque. To the Persians, it was sacred medicine, capable of destroying evil at its root. When a man died, the vessels of his home were washed with gomez 3 times. The floor was sprinkled with ash, the air purified with the smoke of fragrant herbs. The mourners, too, had to bathe, not in water which would spread impurity, but in this sacred liquid, chanting invocations to Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light. Silence was forbidden during the ritual. It was believed that if a man performed the cleansing without speech, the druj, the demon of decay, might hide in the folds of his breath. This obsession with purity governed every detail of Persian life. Even a hair or fingernail of the dead was considered a vessel of danger. Barbers were trained in ritual disposal, burning clippings in separate fires to ensure they never touched temple flames. The Vendidad warned that if a single strand of hair fell into pure water, the stream itself could sicken and die. To defile a river was not merely a crime, it was an assault upon the divine. In the city of Yazd, where the desert horizon glows like hammered bronze, one such tower of silence still stands. Travelers who have climbed its worn stone steps describe a silence that seems alive, a hush so deep it hums in the bones. Beneath that silence lies something older than any tomb, a belief that the body is not to be buried or burned, but undone, atom by atom, until nothing remains to pollute the sacred world. And yet, beneath this ritual, precision lies something profoundly human, a fear of contamination that mirrors our own fear of mortality. The Persians did not deny decay. They mastered it, contained it, and gave it meaning. Death, to them, was not an end, but a test. A moment when the boundary between order and chaos, light and shadow, was drawn once again. One can almost imagine the last light of day dying over those stone circles, the vultures now gone, the sky burning with copper and crimson. The priests descend in silence. The wind returns, whispering through the bones that lie beneath the stones. To stand there is to understand a truth both alien and familiar, that for the Persians, death was not something to escape. It was something to manage, purify, and finally to erase from the world. But purification had its price. For those who mishandled the dead, there was no forgiveness, only exile, silence, and the slow decay of one's own name. And in the next chapter, we'll descend from the towers of the dead into the courts of the living, where justice itself wore a human skin. The hall smelled of oil, bronze, and fear. In the flickering lamplight, a throne loomed at the far end, its surface pale, uneven, and strangely human. The courtiers stood in absolute silence, not daring to breathe too loudly. They all knew what it was made from. The skin that wrapped the seat once belonged to a man who had sat upon it, Sisamnes, a judge who had sold his verdict for gold. And now his very flesh was the warning every official saw before daring to pass judgment. In ancient Persia, justice was not an abstract ideal. It was physical, visible, and terrifyingly alive. The empire of the Achaemenids, the great kings who ruled from Persepolis to the Nile, saw law not as a system of rules, but as a reflection of Asha, the cosmic truth ordained by Ahura Mazda. To twist that truth was to side with Druj, the demon of deceit, and deceit demanded purification, not merely by death, but by transformation. Herodotus tells of King Cambyses, son of Cyrus the Great, who exposed this philosophy with dreadful precision. When Sisamnes accepted a bribe to pervert justice, Cambyses ordered him flayed alive. The man's cries echoed through the marble hall, a sound that seared itself into the memory of the empire. When the execution ended, Cambyses turned to the royal leather workers and gave a single command: "Let the skin serve where the man failed." They stretched it across the judge's chair, stitched it tight, and placed his son, Otanes, upon it as the new judge. Every time Otanes sat, he felt the weight of his father's sin beneath him, the heat of the lamps glistening on the faint lines of the flesh. The law had spoken. Corruption could not be buried. It had to be displayed, immortalized, and turned into an object lesson. To rule Persia was to understand that justice had a body, and that body could bleed. The Persians called this system Arta, law in perfect alignment with divine order. It was the duty of the king to maintain balance, to strike precisely between mercy and severity. But mercy in excess was corruption disguised as kindness. So their punishments became rituals, purifications meant to restore cosmic balance. In the court of Darius the Great, whose rule stretched from the Indus to the Aegean, a whisper of treason was enough to unleash terror. Yet his punishments were often silent. He preferred methods that punished the spirit more than the flesh. Some were sealed inside narrow stone chambers called dar-i-adur, the gate of fire, where no flame was lit, but the air itself seemed to burn. Others were condemned to the royal silence, a punishment of exile and isolation so absolute that their names were erased from inscriptions, their families forbidden to speak of them. Death by blade was mercy. Erasure was annihilation. Even the king himself was bound by the law's cruelty. Darius decreed that if a royal officer condemned a man unjustly, he would take the condemned's place in both sentence and memory. To rule was to stand on a knife's edge. Too much lenience invited chaos. Too much severity bred revolt. Only balance preserved the Asha, the divine order. By the time of Shapur-Thwifurn, centuries later under the Sasanian dynasty, Persian justice had become both theater and theology. In his court at Gundishapur, trials were held before fire altars. Witnesses swore oaths not upon gods or kings, but upon flame itself, the visible breath of Ahura Mazda. To lie before fire was unthinkable. It was said the liar's tongue would blacken within 3 days. If a verdict could not be reached, the accused might be subjected to vara, the ordeal of molten metal. Priests would pour a ladle of glowing silver into the accused's hand or even across his chest. If he survived without harm, the fire had spoken in his favor. If not, then his suffering was the price of truth restored. One inscription from Shapur's reign still chills the reader. We cleansed the kingdom of those who loved deceit more than life. The Persians believed that every act of corruption echoed across the cosmos. One unjust verdict could unbalance the heavens, dimming the stars and angering the sacred fires that guarded their temples. Law was not simply social order, it was cosmic architecture. And yet, in all this brutality, there was something coldly rational. The Persians did not torture for pleasure or revenge. They punished to purify, to burn away the stain of Druj. When a traitor was flayed, the executioners recited hymns as they worked. When an official was blinded with heated brass, priests sprinkled holy water over his wounds. Every lash of pain was a line in the scripture of cosmic maintenance. There were moments, even for kings, when justice demanded horror beyond imagination. One legend speaks of a nobleman who betrayed Shapur during a siege, opening the gates to the Romans. When caught, Shapur spared his life, but not his body. He ordered the man's back flayed and tanned, then used it as the covering for his war drum. Each time the drum sounded, the hollow echo reminded his soldiers that treachery never truly dies. It resounds. Justice in Persia was a mirror of the world they believed in. Fire against shadow, truth against the whisper of decay. To live within that system was to walk beneath the constant gaze of divine balance, knowing that every lie, every bribe, every act of deceit tilted the universe closer to ruin. In the darkness of those stone halls, as the last lamplight flickered over the pale throne, even the most loyal judges shivered. They knew the lesson well. Law was not a shield. It was a sword held by unseen hands. And when the fabric of order trembled, it was always human skin that paid the price. Next, the story turns from judgment to conquest. From the throne of flayed justice to the battlefield where Persian kings claimed to fight not for empire, but for eternity itself. There are no screams in this kind of death, only silence, and the careful scratching of a chisel over stone. A priest bends over an inscription, his hands trembling as he carves a single line through the royal name. When he's finished, he steps back, and the wall looks unchanged, except the name is gone, devoured by absence. The candles flicker, the echo of the forbidden syllables fades, and with that, an entire life, a dynasty, a bloodline ceases to exist, not in body, but in memory. In the vast palaces of Persia, the walls themselves seem to whisper about bloodlines. Who could marry whom? Who was too pure, too divine, or too dangerous to exist? The Zoroastrian world was woven from the threads of purity, not only of flesh but of spirit and genealogy. To defile one's lineage was to stain the order of the cosmos. And so, what the Persians called Suedoda, the union of one's own blood, became one of the empire's most secretive and misunderstood rituals. To outsiders, it was unthinkable. To the Persians, it was sanctified. They believed the gods had first united brother and sister to create the world. Thus, the same union among mortals could restore that original perfection. These marriages were whispered of only in priestly circles, sanctioned by the magi who guarded the sacred texts. In royal courts, they served a practical purpose, to keep divinity sealed within the bloodline. When Artaxerxes Tut was crowned, the priests declared that his marriage to his own daughter was not a sin, but an offering to Ahura Mazda. To mingle pure with pure, they said, is to strengthen the flame. Those words, recorded in the darkest margins of temple archives, reveal a civilization willing to blur the line between devotion and desecration. Yet, the same people who sanctified such unions could erase a name for a single act of defiance. To speak or write the name of a condemned traitor was to pollute the air. Their inscriptions were not simply chiseled out, they were ritually unmade. Priests would recite the Ahuna Vairia prayer as they scraped the stone, returning the name to silence. The act was known as frasham kartan, to cleanse by deletion. In Persepolis, where columns rise like petrified flames, archaeologists once found an inscription half effaced, the royal titulature missing. The space where the name should have been was smoothed so perfectly it seemed time itself had done it. But it wasn't time. It was justice, the Persian kind where even memory could be condemned. In this realm, remembrance was not a privilege, it was a judgment. To be remembered was to exist eternally within the sacred cycle of Asha. To be erased was to fall into Druj, the realm of lies and chaos. Families who fell from grace didn't merely die, their names were forbidden in prayer, their lineage purged from temple lists. Mothers were instructed not to speak their children's names. Husbands were ordered to burn letters, gifts, portraits. Forgetting was not an accident. It was a decree. One story tells of Prince Ardavan, who dared to challenge his brother's claim to the throne. The rebellion was short. His followers were impaled outside Susa. His own body was burned beyond recognition. But the true execution came afterward. His name was struck from every record, his likeness erased from murals. When a servant accidentally mentioned him at court, he was whipped for defiling the king's heir. Within a generation, even his tomb was lost beneath the sand. The priests believed they were protecting creation itself. Every lie, every forbidden act, every impure union weakened the world's foundation. And yet, within the sanctum of royal chambers, the same priests whispered blessings over marriages that defied every human law. It was purity redefined. Purity of purpose, not of flesh. The paradox burned quietly in the heart of Persia. What is purity, after all, when divinity demands corruption to preserve itself? When the very act of keeping the bloodline pure requires sin by mortal measure? To erase a name was to destroy corruption. To marry one's kin was to preserve holiness. The same hand that sanctified could condemn, and both were acts of devotion. In the reign of Shapur II, this contradiction reached its most perilous form. His mother, Queen Ifrahormizd, was said to have been both his parent and his consecrator. Legends claimed that Shapur, still in her womb, was crowned by the Magi before birth, making him the eternal king, the child of pure flame. Whether myth or doctrine, the belief blurred every boundary between sacred and human. And yet, within those same walls, countless others vanished without a trace. Their names were never carved, their deeds never sung. The scribes called them Nasuneam, the names of impurity. They existed only as gaps in the archives, empty spaces where lives should have been. To the Persians, this was the ultimate punishment. Not torture, not execution, but unbeing. Even today, the ruins of Persepolis tell the story through absence. On certain tablets, a faint outline remains where a name once was, like a ghost pressed into stone. The grooves catch the light at sunset, and for a moment, it almost looks as if the name might return, just long enough to whisper its own erasure. In that silence lies the true terror of Persian justice. Death ended a body, erasure ended a soul. And somewhere in the shifting sands beyond Yazd, beneath the same stars their kings once prayed to, the forgotten wait, not for resurrection, but for remembrance. Because in Persia, to live wrongly was to die once, but to be erased was to die forever.